Hey guys, welcome to the Week at the Movies. My name is Sajin Shrijith and today I am reviewing the latest Mission Impossible film, The Final Reckoning. In the opening of H.G. Wells' classic science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds, we are told of a world suddenly being threatened by sentient beings with an intelligence far greater than man's own and yet as mortal as he is. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. 1. Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning presents a near dystopian scenario, one that's brought about by an artificial intelligence called the Entity, introduced in the last film. It's a scenario that could get progressively worse if Tom Cruise's character Ethan Hunt didn't do something about it. Second, Tom Cruise, who starred in a War of the Worlds adaptation 20 years ago, is placed in circumstances far riskier than what those Martian invaders conjured up over any he had encountered in the previous Mission Impossible films. Final Reckoning, a direct continuation of the events of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, is surprisingly a cinematic adventure that feels small and big at once. Small because it's arguably the heaviest in terms of plotting and lighter on action set pieces. Big because when the action set pieces finally present themselves in glorious IMAX, they are the most thrilling and dangerous Tom Cruise has by far undertaken, with the threats growing increasingly palpable the deeper Ethan Hunt goes into the rabbit's hole. Ghost Protocol presented to us the insane Burj Khalifa stunt, which we thought was the maximum extent to which Cruise could go. But we realized that wasn't the case when, of course, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation came with the aircraft stunt, followed by the helicopter chase in Mission Impossible Fallout. But the underwater retrieval mission and the climactic set piece involving two biplanes in Final Reckoning far outweigh the stunts attempted in all the previous Mission Impossible films. So, what about the plot? When Dead Reckoning came out, the primary complaints concerned the convoluted plotting and pacing issues. And I must admit that, as much as I enjoyed that one, upon a rewatch, I felt that maybe it could have benefited from a tighter, fast paced opening and a more polished, less confusing storyline. One may argue that these films are review proof and that one doesn't go into a Mission Impossible film for the storyline. I mean, take the John Woo directed 2000 sequel, often referred to as the weakest of the franchise. But funnily enough, many defend it purely on account of its super cool stunts. Judging from some of the international reviews that lean more towards the negative side, I can sense that Final Reckoning 2 might get treated with the same lukewarm reception that Dead Reckoning got. It has already been accused of being bloated, but I don't share the same view. I found this one more entertaining, more suspenseful, and better paced than the other. This outcome is mostly a result of Mcquarrie bringing in more characters, splitting them into three groups, and making all their involvements crucial to the central objective. By cross cutting the action between the three, Mcquarrie is essentially doing what Christopher Nolan is known for even in his weakest films. It's only natural that I bring up Nolan because I've often felt that the two filmmakers are quite alike. Remember, for instance, that prison truck sequence in Fallout that evoked a similar situation in The Dark Knight? Is it necessary for us to understand every single thing that's happening in these films? I don't think so. Let me bring up the case of those noir classics of the 1940s, specifically The Maltese Falcon or The Big Sleep, both starring Humphrey Bogart, that have the central character, a private detective undertaking a certain assignment. I'm sure a lot of people who love these films, including myself, wouldn't be that confident enough to say that they understood every single plot development. For example, the statue of the Maltese Falcon is a classic MacGuffin, a plot device that's actually insignificant but without which we wouldn't have a film. We could say this about a lot of thrillers across the fiction spectrum. How many of us remember the events in, for example, the Da Vinci Code? I mention this book because there are areas in both Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning that give off not only the vibe of a Dan Brown novel, but also something written by Tom Clancy, like, for example, The Hunt for Red October or The Sum of Odd Fears. What's most admirable about this franchise is that every entry looks different in comparison to the one that preceded it. Imagine how boring it would be if every film looked the same in terms of storytelling approach. When Christopher McQuarrie took on the task of steering this franchise to even greater heights, starting with Rogue Nation, one imagines Tom Cruise wanted the rest of the films to have a unifying look. They only differed in terms of the race stakes. I couldn't help but feel a whiff of The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, given how Ethan Hunt has evolved from a junior spy to this messianic Neo like figure in whom the fate of the entire world rests. But in the hands of a lesser filmmaker, this evolution would have felt tacky and unconvincing. Cruise, it goes without saying, continues to sell his character's resolve with utmost conviction. However, Final Reckoning shows us that the real intention was to tie all 8 films together in some way, no doubt a huge responsibility for Mcquarrie. And as its trailer hinted at references to some of the previous entries, we see the after effects of what Ethan Hunt did in the past, especially in the first film directed by Brian De Palma, would show up in some way in Final Reckoning, which opens fittingly with a neatly cut collage of some key moments in Ethan Hunt's cinematic journey. And we realize later why. Just as how in Dead Reckoning we saw one integral character from Ethan's past making an appearance, Final Reckoning brings up more old connections in ways I didn't expect, in addition to certain unforeseen developments with regard to other familiar and favorite characters. I must admit, I felt quite emotional at how Mcquarrie handled these developments. So, is this the final Mission Impossible film? I hope it isn't. So, that's my review of Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. Thanks for watching.